for being joining us today. I'm really excited to introduce today's guest as Meaghan Ybos. She is here to talk to us about her work around sexual assaults and sexual assault investigations and reform in that arena. So in 2003, at the age of 16, Meaghan had reported to the Memphis Police Department that she had been raped. Years later, following up with the status of the investigation and the results, looking for the results of the forensic exam, she had learned that the police had not investigated her case, and her rape kit that had been processed that the rape kit had not been processed, which had been obtained for 10 years earlier. From this experience, she began to work diligently to raise awareness about needed policy changes surrounding sexual assault investigations in the spotlight the enormity of the unprocessed rape kits, including exposing that Memphis PD had over 12,000 untested rape kits in their storage. Her advocacy first resulted in persuading the Memphis City Council to allocate over $3 million to cover the cost of investigating thousands of previously ignored rape cases. In 2015, Meaghan became the co-founder and executive director of PERL, the People for the Enforcement of Rape Laws, which advocates criminal justice reform and provides communities peer support for people who have experienced sexual violence. Ms. Ybos is also a contributing writer at The Appeal, part of the Harvard University School of Law's Fair Punishment Project. She holds a BA from Rhodes College and a Juris Doctor from University of Mississippi. So thank you for being here, Meaghan. Did I get all of that right?
That's right. Thank you.
So I would really like just to kind of start, if you could just share a little bit about the overall experience that led you to begin working as an advocate in reform.
Well, I didn't really feel that I had a choice because, like you said, I was attacked in 2003. And so that was when I was a junior in high school. And from the way that the police reacted to that, like by telling me that nothing had happened, I internalized that in a very unhealthy way. So for the next 10 years, I was just like, I thought that I would be able to live my life as though nothing had happened because the police had reacted as if nothing had happened. And obviously that did not work out for me, but 10 years later, it came back into my life, and I hadn't even processed my rape by that time. And I didn't learn definitively in 2012 that my rape kit had not been tested. It was just intimated that they would then be testing it to see whatever. And that was just shocking to me. The forensic exam process was so traumatizing right after I was attacked like that. And I wouldn't have submitted to that if I knew that they were not going to use that. So in a way that felt like a state assault in addition to the assault that I had gone through, like almost under false pretenses, I submitted to this invasive exam by the government. And just trying to get answers about that, I consulted with a lawyer, and we decided to file a lawsuit against the city. It seemed like the problems were way bigger than just what was shown in my case. And in fact, they were, we found out that Memphis had not processed about 12 to 15,000 rape kits, and then had also thrown away many, and we still don't know the number that they've thrown away. So that's how I got involved in this.
So did Memphis police offer any justification for A, their inaction on the investigation, and B, their inaction on even processing, which, one would seem that is the most the least that they could do, as you said, especially after re-traumatizing you. No. But they offer any mea culpa?
No. I mean, I think that may be as expected, if litigation is involved, they don't want to admit to whatever that would cause them more liability. But on a human level, they kind of blamed me. They claimed that, like, I was initially, when I reported, that investigators thought I was lying. And I was 16, and apparently that was used against me, just that I was a young kid. And then the quote unquote justification for all of the rape kits was that they didn't have enough money.
Yeah. So one of the things I've talked about publicly about my experience as a police officer, especially surrounding sexual assault cases, I've always said that it's only sexual assault cases for which the victim has an additional burden to prove that they were a victim, right? If I call the police and say, "Hey, I was just robbed," of course, the police are going to look for some red flags just in case, because people do make false reports, of course. Yeah. But that's such a minority. And I share a story, if I may, about when I was an officer in South Carolina. I had responded to the hospital where a woman had walked in and reported her rape while she was undergoing the rape kit process. So she's likely, laying there with her feet in stirrups, and her. I don't know if our listeners know the great detail for which is required, to obtain evidence for a rape kit. But while she was there, I spoke to the lead detective had shown up, and I gave him an update as to what was going on. And his question was, "Well, do you believe her?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "Well, bitches be lying."
Yeah.
Right. So it was just immediately, and I know I'm not telling you anything that either you didn't experience yourself or that I'm sure I've heard countless stories of, but from the perspective of the police, it just seems to be that there is, which is a huge dose of misogyny, I'm sure. I think another part of it is that, for men, that there's, the fear of being falsely accused of a crime, and then for whatever reason, the culture of policing overstates that, that this is somehow, this kind of likelihood of even happening. But the other really big issue for us, and then, relative to, our work is about whether or not police are adequately even trained to investigate these kinds of cases. And so, to become a sexual assault investigator or a rape detective, the training can be a week long, maybe 2 weeks tops. So during your process of litigation, our sirens going off?
No, it was just them during it.
Okay. During the process of your litigation or the work behind it, was there any examination about how the officers were trained to deal with these kinds of cases, or did they feel like it was adequate?
Well, that depends on who you ask. And we've deposed some former sex crimes detectives about this. We've been involved in this lawsuit for like 6 years now, and the city still hasn't produced discovery. So
it's still pending.
Oh yeah.
Oh wow.
And it's we're trying to make it a class action because of the amount of people that would be possible claimants. But with regard to the training, I think that like with this particular like failure on the police department, I think some of it does have to do with training. Like I've heard different instances about like sex crimes detectives maybe acting inappropriately and acting in a way that would obviously be counter to training. But I kind of also have the impression that that the department's priorities override any training that sex crimes detectives would receive. For example, as of like 5 years ago, I think I'm getting these numbers right. The the Memphis sex crimes unit had 40 detectives. And of those, like 10 handled just juvenile cases, 10 handled current rapes, and then like 20 or so, like the breakdown was such that like only 10 to 12 officers are staffed with investigating all adult rapes in the city. And that's not enough for the amount of work that is involved with investigating. You know, like, as you know, it takes work to investigate something like a rape. It takes work to investigate everything, but with a rape, it may take more work, especially if it was a stranger. The detectives are put in a position where they can't, their caseloads are like in the hundreds, and they have to get rid of cases in order to keep their caseload at a level the department is okay with. And then that leads them to then employ these techniques like, oh, okay, well, she's probably lying. She was like doing this or whatever. She's not going to be credible. I don't believe that. I view that kind of as like not necessarily a training question, but just like a logistical like technique that the police have to use to make certain cases get off their caseload.
I think you're touching on something that explains a lot in policing, is what these are people who are managing work, and then in their mind they're managing cases and numbers and files, and they look for easy routes. And,
they call it triaging.
Right. And I think it explains why, so there are so many drug cases.
Exactly. Because if you compare also the drug unit of MPD, it's bigger than the sex crimes unit.
It's easy to complete a booking form and a police report when the evidence is, well, I found the drugs in his pocket, or I found it in his home or car.
And then they are getting grant money to specifically do drug policing.
Right. There are these institutional incentives to drive policing to cases where it's easy to make an arrest and make a case for a felony.
Exactly.
First of all, I'm sorry, Randy, is it okay if I just jump in?
Please go on.
Quick? First of all, thank you for talking about this. If anyone here, if any of the three of us, this is heavy stuff. If anyone needs to take a break or whatever, let's just say so. But I just wanted to say thank you for having experienced this and doing all of this work, and then also being willing to be a public advocate and speak about it publicly.
Thank you.
I really appreciate that and admire that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Your path in your academic career, am I correct in assuming this was fueled by this experience?
Yeah, I think it was, but I didn't even know it at the time because I was in such a just unhealthy mental state. I wanted to go to law school initially because I wanted to find out if I had or had not been raped. So that's just, I mean, I can laugh about that now. And then of course, like it led me, like I had like an interest in criminal law. So it's
right. Can you, I think that's fascinating to have. And I don't think that's like, it's silly at all. I mean, you have this incredibly profound, traumatizing experience that there was no institution in place to help you manage that effectively. And well, there is no way to manage it effectively, but I also wasn't getting the help that I needed. Like, I was trying to go into denial. So of course I didn't get therapy about the rape. But this was in a way your way of managing it.
Yeah.
Which I think is a beautiful thing that you were able to do that. Can you talk a little bit about that process? Maybe, how do you think that it's made you better at your job, having or just talk about it a little bit? What comes to mind?
I mean, like, I remember when I was taking criminal law my first year of law school, like we learned rape. And so I was like, okay, so this sounds like I may have been raped under the definition. So it's kind of like obvious, like what I complained about is like obviously meeting the elements of this crime that I'm learning about. So it's just weird. Like, why did that happen? And I just like, the more I learned about it, I just became more and more confused and wanted to learn more about the dynamics that would be in play inside of the criminal justice system to then lead to that, where that, and I really tried not to talk to anyone about this because, first of all, when I did, a lot of times people didn't believe me. And that was, I didn't want, like, especially with like, I wanted to go into the legal profession. So that's like a conservative profession. I don't want people thinking that I'm, making up crimes, or that I would be like so emotionally frail I wouldn't be able to do legal work. But also, like, when I explained it to people and then they did believe what happened, they still would have like trouble intellectually believing it. They would be like, well, I just, like, I'm sorry, but I don't understand, like, because the police are supposed to investigate crimes. Like, why would they not? So, I mean, that's a question that I've only in recent years come to understand the answers to.
Right. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Thank you. Go ahead, Randy.
Well, I would just like to add on that, I think that there is a great deal of people who have entered inside the justice system because there was something that shaped them in their life that was a lack of feeling of justice. I came from a horribly abusive home as a child, physically, sexually, emotionally abused. I was in my 30s until a therapist said to me, well, you realize this is what's drawing you, to working in the criminal justice system. And I was like, holy shit, that never occurred to me. I knew I was always drawn, to this work, but even like I always laugh and say, like, even when we were playing football as a kid, I wanted to be the referee. Right? Is that I think that kind of deep embedded into our psyche when people are victims and then later come into the justice system, that there is this push to find fairness in a society where fair is not, aptly available to everyone, and then this happens just kind of in autopilot, right? And until at some point, either you have your own epiphany or somebody points out, like, you realize this is why you're doing this, right? So you got through law school, and I'm assuming as you began talking about this, you started hearing more stories of people, with similar experiences as yours. At what point did, like, you're in law school or after you completed law school, did you begin being really vocal about, because as Tom said, right, I mean, this is just, an experience for which having to tell and retell and tell again these stories is got to have some level probably of therapeuticness, if that's a word, and trauma at the same time. So what was there an event or something that just said, you know what, I'm going to use this as I'm going to use my voice for the better cause?
Yeah, so I didn't talk about this stuff when I was in law school, really, and I still didn't, like, I had not even like put together logically like what I had actually experienced. It, like, I've since been in therapy to process stuff, but this was like 10 years ago when I was in law school. And then, so I really, really tried not to talk about it or think about it. Sure. And I was like just coping in very unhealthy ways. And then like it was like my world was crashing down. Like all the stuff was coming back up because I was no longer in school, so I didn't have that to distract me anymore. So, and then exactly the same time when I was like, it was all crashing down on me, was when the rape case came back into my life through like a TV story saying that the Memphis police are looking for a possible serial rapist in this area with this time frame. And like the point that I was at that time, like I had like forbidden my family from talking to me about it because it was, you know, it's like, what was there to be done by talking about it? Nothing. So, and it was so disturbing. I just like, and my family respected my wishes and we really didn't talk about it. But my mom saw that story on the news. And so she texted it to me. And at first I was like, I lashed out at her. I think I was like, why would you send me this? This is not the same guy, obviously, like whatever. But then I was persuaded to call the police department and just to say like, hey, I have a case from such and such date that sounds possibly similar. The only details that were given out was that it was a white guy in the area. And so I called them and wasn't given any information at that time, just that they would look into it. And then a few months later, they confirmed that it was the same person from my case. And that's how it came back into my life. And for like a whole year, though, at least, like I didn't even process that they may not have tested my rape kit right away. 'Cause I was so overwhelmed with like my rapist or the person they say is my rapist being caught. Just a lot of stuff. I was just very overwhelmed because I hadn't processed the rape at that time. I was kind of forced to process all of it, which is fine. But that's why I started getting involved once I learned like how many other people that this had happened to just in Memphis. And I kind of had a unique window into that because my rapist was a serial rapist. And so I did hear about similar treatment to other victims of his that was exactly the same as how police had treated me.
So like the process of being walked through your case, because it was a serial case, you saw other people were having the similar experience. So you recognize, okay,
well,
this
no,
is
it wasn't like I wasn't given any info, but like a year later after he was arrested, my rapist pleaded guilty. And so when I went to the courthouse for his guilty plea, I met the other victims while we were waiting in a room for him to plead guilty. And like, I was very upset that he was pleading guilty because I wanted a trial to happen because I wanted to learn what was like, I still want to learn about the case. I still know practically nothing. And I wanted the public to be able to see how the police had like thwarted all of these victims when they reported. But that didn't happen. So that probably motivated me also to like bring public attention to this because it would just have been a guilty plea and he would have gone off. And the other victims didn't really seem that interested in like bringing light to the situation. I think some of them are now, they've grown, but it was like, I cannot just allow this guy to go off, this case to just go disappear and then like not involve the public with what's going on with the police department.
You want some like restorative justice.
I just wanted the public to know what was going on because the police obviously, like, this is not, maybe it's changed now, but for like a lot of people, they didn't know that like this was how the police like possibly often treat rape complainants.
And are
like
they
just by accusing them of lying like off the bat, like before investigating.
Can you talk a little bit about trying to get documents and access to reports and that sort of thing with the police department? How's that been?
Yeah. I think my first attempt at doing that was when a newspaper investigator was trying to report about my rapist and how he had been allowed to like go, to accomplish so much as a rapist without the police doing anything. And so the county didn't want to give the case file to this journalist, even though the case had concluded. And I think they also tried to discredit me to the journalist. Like, by they, I mean the county attorney. They were like, you don't need to write about this. Like, it's not a rape. It's not one of those rapes. I don't even know what that means. I think she was just trying to say that I was a liar. But it was a tenacious journalist, and he kept trying to get the records, and I had to sign some kind of release and go down there in person. But then he ended up getting the case file. And I think that that's my only time that I've had to seek records on this.
How many known victims from this one offender are there?
7.
7?
Yeah, and my case was the first known one. But I would bet anything that I wasn't the first person that he attacked, because he seemed very, for lack of a better word, professional about it. He was he knew what he was doing, and he knew how to get around being caught.
Well, no wonder that so many people don't report if we've created a process that this is the process. It's very understandable for me that a person would be a victim and not want to report.
Oh yeah.
Even if the initial reporting, there was some compassion with the officer, there wasn't these, accusations that the victim is lying. I mean, just simply, what you touched on a little bit ago about the allocation of resources and training is the solve rates, right? Chicago PD, released last year's, or it might have been 2019, but released their violent crime solve, or not just violent crime, all crime solve rate, and sexual assaults were under 5%. Under 5%.
I didn't see that.
It's astonishing, right?
Didn't Chicago refuse to participate in the UCR for several years?
I don't know.
I think because I've been looking for the data from Chicago police, and for a long time I couldn't find it. But maybe they just did this on their own and not through the UCR.
Yeah, I think it was some work from a journalist who there was internal reporting from Chicago PD. I'll look for this article, and we'll post it, and I'll also shoot it over to you.
Yeah, but
Meaghan.
That's amazing. Under 5% though. I think that a lot of people in the public don't put that together when it comes time to fund the police budget.
Right. Yeah. And I talk about this all the time about one of my really major frustrations about policing, especially when we talk about defunding the police, is police priorities, right? I mean, so even if we move away from sexual assault, I mean, if we look at most violent crime is about 60%. If you or I were only effective at our job 55 or 60% of the time, we'd be fired, right? But we see things, I'm here in LA, and I know of decoy bicycle traps that the cops are spending time on to find out who's stealing a bicycle. That infuriates me, because I think if you were a victim of a crime, especially of a very traumatizing crime, or if your loved one was a victim of a crime, in a homicide or violent assault, and you're driving down the road, and what you're seeing the resources being spent on is, them hassling somebody about panhandling.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
So like for me, when I'm asked the questions about defunding, yes, I think that, police budgets are overbloated. Here in LA, we have helicopters flying all over the place, which I think is absurd. It's like
Yes.
Fallujah sometimes. But to me, the bigger issue is about an allocation problem, and is that what emphasis are we placing on solving crimes instead of, like what Tom said, about, getting this, what would be considered low hanging fruit of, some poor marginalized person who you can pop with a little bit of heroin in their pocket. That really is harming no one else, right?
I remember being on I think now I would call it an interdisciplinary squad, where we had people who investigated dope. So we had a couple of guys who worked dope cases. We had a couple of guys who worked robberies, a couple of guys who worked burglaries, a couple of guys who worked gangs. And we would, when one team of officers picked up a case, then the rest of the squad would rally to support them with executing a search warrant and doing the work. And then it was supposed to be directing resources to officers, like officers from a precinct would come and say, hey, we have this serial robbery case we want extra help with, and this is what the squad would focus on. But invariably, the drug cases would suck up all of the resources, and I think it was a big part of it is that it was so easy. You made a traffic stop, you found dope on somebody leaving a drug house, you did it a few times, you got a couple statements, you had enough for a search warrant. Where with these other cases, it involved doing lineups and getting physical evidence and investigation, and then getting confessions.
Yeah.
Admissions, catching people. It was a much more challenging work. So I think, like Meaghan talked about earlier, was just, it's about these institutional incentives to a great degree. And I think that's why we see a lot of this, enforcement of people, the unhoused, keeping them out of gentrified areas, is because it's a tangible thing that you can go to your constituents and say, look, we made
absolutely
pictures of drugs and money on a table, or an absence of homeless people is easy.
Yeah,
well,
that's an impression too.
I've mentioned this before, but because it's another thing that infuriates me is that so after the unrest around George Floyd's murder here in Los Angeles. And so this isn't just like local cops making their own priorities, right? Right. So from the district attorney's office, the old DA. So hopefully we have some reform, but the district attorney's office, the LA County Sheriff's Office, the LAPD, and the FBI, along with the mayor, stood at City Hall to proudly proclaim that they had developed a task force to identify vandals, right? Who was throwing a brick through the local CVS window. And my first thought was like, where the fuck is the task force for the unsolved homicides?
I know.
Where's the task force for the unsolved sexual assaults and robberies? Yeah, and it's just shocking to me that that these things lack such priority.
Yeah, it's like a vicious cycle, I think, too, because then it's like politically popular to do stuff like that.
Yep.
And like probably cheaper than it is to like investigate homicides, to just like shake people down on the street, or like do proactive, like low level type of policing. And then you can take that to a sector of the community that's not victimized by that kind of policing. And they love that. Right. And then that thing probably gets more funding every year. And so then they keep doing that more every year. Right.
Absolutely. So let's fast forward a little bit to PERL. And can you tell us a little bit about what brought you? I mean, we understand the deep reasons why, what brought you to form the organization, and what is its primary mission?
Yeah. We founded it by and for people who've experienced sexual violence, a lot of whom reported their experiences to law enforcement, and then were treated the same way that I was. And my co-founder and I really, like in 2015, it reached like a crisis point where the federal government was partnering with celebrities to, and then forming new grants to like advance this narrative that the police didn't have enough money to investigate rape. And like I find that horrible, and not to mention like untrue. It's a matter of their priorities, but we wanted to provide a counter narrative to this, because it seems like not all, but almost every victim advocacy or victims' rights group that I've ever found just comes down around the standard law enforcement talking points. So we wanted to provide a counter to that. And for a few years, we offered peer support groups. In recent years, I got a grant to do a research project that analyzes police spending to try to suss out through that, like the priorities. And I hope to publish that later this year sometime. So we're just, at this point, I hope that PERL can be like a counter narrative tool, because these issues are still being misframed in the public, I think.
So if magic wand, right? If we, and I know that, you know, this is an incredibly complex issue that has a lot of moving parts, right? It's, you know, Tom and I talk about this as both being, you know, former cops, is that, yes, you know, the police have a huge role in a lot of these problems, right? Foundationally, but there's a lot of, you know, a lot of influences to the failures that we have in our society, especially surrounding criminal justice. But where, like, what do you feel is like the actionable steps that we can move towards that would improve this?
So I know this sounds simplistic, but I think like one of the most impactful things could be ending the drug war. And I mean, that's probably not even possible, but that seems to have shaped so much of the law enforcement priorities over the past few decades. And I'm not sure if that, I haven't been able to figure out if like the drug war led to like the theory of proactive policing, or if that's just like a concomitant thing. But I think that proactive policing is also a big part of like the priority situation that leads to like only 10 detectives handling all adult rapes in Memphis. And I think that if we as our culture could stop equating the number of reported crimes with like how successful or not the police are, because I don't think that the police can control the number of reported crimes. So we shouldn't be blaming the police when crime, you know, I mean, it's complicated, but that kind of thinking leads to increasing police budgets for proactive low-level things, while the solve rate for like violent crimes remains so low. But that doesn't seem to compute with people who want to tie the crime rate to like police staffing, and just like along the lines of like we generally make police do so many things. And so like that's an argument that the defund movement points out. If we could try to ratchet back some of the things that we force the police to do, just like, for example, traffic enforcement, I think that could be a major step. Like, yeah, like those are the things that come to mind immediately.
Automated vehicles and public transportation should be I think should be viewed as a public safety issue as well, where
Yes.
we say these are it creates volatile encounters between the state and individuals, drunk driving. I mean, there's so many things that can be solved by thinking outside of the institution of policing and saying, how can we change our infrastructure, change our universities, our schools, our, to control human behavior with soft power by providing positive freedom and opportunity. And yeah, that definitely.
I wish I remember who tweeted this out, because I would love to give credit for it because I cite it all the time. But to your point, Meaghan, is it's kind of this re-envisioning of the role of law enforcement and what are their jobs. So, like, one of the things that we've been studying, and I know Tom studies as well with the Tillman Foundation, is what events are police officers responding to when there's deadly use of force, or on our end is we've done that and then combined as well when officers are killed. And we know domestic violence response is number one, danger. Number two on both is traffic stops. And but something I read on Twitter one day is, because then the simple solution is let's reduce traffic stops, right? I mean, I think that there's always going to be some role until we get to autonomy and those kinds of things that the police, if like a drunk driver or something. But someone tweeted out that they said, reimagining public safety means that when you're driving down the road and your taillight is out, a service worker stops you and helps you change the bulb, right? And here I am, over 50 years old. I'm like, holy shit! That never occurred to me that that's such a no-brainer solution, that then you don't have an armed encounter, right? The old saying that my old captain used to say is, you showing up as a police officer brings a gun to a situation where there probably wasn't one. There isn't this adversity between the communities and the state. It's just a no-brainer. But that that also means huge loss in revenue and
a major hit to the drug war. I think the traffic enforcement and drug war. I mean, I know me personally, when I was conducting traffic stops in my squad, they were doing traffic stops. They were usually pretextual stops. You were thinking, oh, okay, well, I'm going to look for guns. I'm going to look for drugs. And then it's not because, I saw a taillight. There's usually, it's a way in. So sort of removing that as a primary function and a dangerous function for police officers and the citizenry, I think is a great first step. And the two kind of go together.
Yeah. If I may ask, what do you guys think about police service technicians? Do you think that that's an acceptable substitute, or would you rather it not be part of the police?
So, like the community, unarmed or unsworn response. So, I think I think on the short term, I think it's a good idea. But the problem is that it leaves it inside the structure of policing. So it's still viewed as an enforcement. I like it on the short term because I think that that's the path of least resistance to start getting, to get us to reimagine policing. But eventually I would like for it to break away. The other thing too is that, and this is astonishing to me, my partner, she's a crime analyst here in LA, crime intelligence analyst. It's shocking to me the lack of technology that they have. And so somebody, I think LA PD report recently said, we're going to start doing non-emergency reporting online. And I was like, now? In 2021, you're going to start this now. So just I think that did like Alex Vitale, who wrote The End of Policing. I'm on a panel with him later this afternoon. To his point is that is, very much of this is just in which ways can we reduce, the interactions.
The interactions.
For sure. So I'm certainly in favor there. And again, like even when we talk about the fund, I don't know the intricacies of the police budgets. I mean, I know I read this morning that NYPD is pushing for a $200 million increase to hire 450 new school police officers, which, I don't think cops should be in schools, period, full stop. But I think for me, it's more about is that there has to be some pressure that's applied from people, even from folks like you, to be like, what are you guys doing when you're spending man hours on a stolen bicycle? Or on the drug war.
Well, and creating interactions with people who are already on the margins and who are going to face the highest consequences of that interaction.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. This is fascinating. To answer what Randy answered, I think so I agree that there needs to be a reimagining of the policing function and reducing the number of interactions and the types of interactions, and finding other solutions like, people who are in crisis, sending response teams, instead of, armed police, or if it is dangerous, sending teams, working together, all of these types of solutions. But I don't think that we're really going to get at the root cause of these problems until we think about, a larger social transformation, like at a much broader scale. Like, we don't have high-speed rail or public transportation in the United States. We have these deindustrialized cities like St. Louis, where people are completely disconnected.
Walking around
and not feel, and we've created a society where huge numbers of people feel desperate, where we have these deaths of despair, opioid crisis. I think that to address all of these problems, and policing is going to require like something along the lines of a New Deal, like, major public infrastructure projects, people from deindustrialized and marginalized communities being provided opportunities to move into the middle class with, really good income and jobs that are fulfilling and career, so I recognize that we need to work on policing as an institution, and that these institutions of social control. But if we really want to get to things, I think that this, and young people especially, need to be thinking big. So that's where.
Mm-hmm. Well, I talk about I had a police captain years ago who said, so now 31 years ago, who said, whatever notions you have of policing, disregard it, because what you are doing is arresting the 3Ds. And he said the drunk, the drugged, and the deranged. And, not the most politically correct terminology around mental health for sure. But the point was well taken and most accurate. And so like when I talk about, causes of crime, I teach, it's poverty, education, and mental health. Those are the predictors of crime. But even like back then, so, even as a very young person, I was like, but that can be fixed, right? I mean, we can fix that. So, why aren't we? And I agree, Tom, that I think that there's two issues. Is that we've got to think long term about really making some meaningful change. You don't have a tornado flying towards you.
There's something going on, but it's okay.
But I think that there's some harm reduction that we can focus on as well on the short term. Yeah,
I think that's a very important frame to be used in this kind of thing. Harm reduction. Police are like the opposite of harm reduction.
Yeah, absolutely. And to our cause is that they're not trained to, right? I mean, what is the focus of the training that police officers are? It's all about so much was focused on officer safety, but it's all about this low-level interactions, drug cases, public intoxications, traffic stops, these kinds of things. And then you breeze right on by. Number one, you breeze by law. 60 hours is on the average of criminal law in an academy. Shockingly low. But even basic investigations is maybe a week. I don't even know if I did a full week on just overall investigations, maybe a couple of days here and there on interviews or, I don't even think I was taught how to pull fingerprints. But the other is the advanced training, kind of talking about what you're experiencing with Memphis is that here in California, as an example, they have over 1,200 advanced classes, the state of that's approved by the state post. One class, outside of basic training, one class is longer than 2 weeks, and that's SWAT training.
SWAT training. That's great.
Yeah. So homicide investigation, 2 weeks, sexual assault investigation, 2 weeks.
That's perfect.
Yeah. So, this is, especially as we talk about harm reduction is that this is a part of, where, yes, there's some institutional issues. There's culture problems for sure inside of policing, but I try not to individualize it too much because I feel like they've been set up to fail. Right.
I think so too.
Yeah. So, is your stance on rape kits as an example? I mean, do you view this as a vital tool, especially the advancement of things like DNA testing, where that's, we now have police departments with in-house DNA test capabilities? I mean, do you think that is a solution that not the only solution, but one that for which emphasis should be placed?
You mean as an investigative tool?
Yeah. For to ensure, like, if we're talking about funding as an example, or defunding, whichever, is your position that, number one, we need to be staffing these units greater. It needs to be placed obviously as a greater priority. But from a technological standpoint, is that what you're hoping to see as investment there, or
actually,
are we just chasing our tail?
I think we may be like chasing our tail / creating a new monster with this DNA stuff. Because the DNA technology field has rapidly advanced over the past even just 5 years. And there's not a lot of transparency with the actual technology. And I find that frightening. There's just like anything, DNA analysis is a human endeavor, and it should be able to be cross-examined in court. And a defendant's attorney should have access to the algorithm that does the genetic
sequencing
analysis. Yeah. But as far as I know, and a lot of those DNA companies make those algorithms their proprietary, private trade secret. I'm not sure if I'm using that term correctly. So,
right.
So there's not a lot of transparency. There's a lot that can go wrong. Just from basic things like storage and chain of custody, which is an issue in Memphis. But also to then the human side of the analysis, whatever the person in the lab is doing, and there can be contamination, or the samples on which your algorithm is based could be racially biased. I'm not smart enough to explain this properly, but there's a great book, Inside the Cell by Erin Murphy, that goes into this. She actually mentioned my rape case in her book. But it's a really accessible read, but she goes into all of the variables that go into DNA testing, from the collection to the storage to the analysis and the rendering, the matching. It's a lot of different stuff that I wouldn't have even known about. I would have thought it was just a one-time process, but it actually involves many different steps and so many different variables. They're now using DNA mixtures, and the kind of DNA testing that they have now is so sensitive that it can pick up on scraps and mixtures of DNA samples, whereas in years past wouldn't have been able to produce DNA profiles. And the danger of that is that testing oftentimes consumes the sample. So this is just one problem. So you've got this like partial sample degraded, and then like the DNA testing done by some lab like eats up the sample. So then what if I wanted to question that testing? I wouldn't have access to that sample because it's now been eaten up by the chemicals to do the DNA testing. So I would just like cautiously, like, just like any crime scene analysis, it's subject to like junk science and human errors. And so, yeah, I think that I wish that we could just talk about rape as just like we talk about other crimes where you've got crime scene evidence and the police can collect that evidence and then technicians can do what they will with it. And we should have the same skepticism of that we have with like fingerprint analysis or like anything else. But yeah, like when someone reports a rape, especially if they don't know who attacked them, the DNA evidence from their rape kit might be the only way to investigate that. So yeah, I do think that's important, but we should just put it alongside all of the other tools that are available to the police and be cautious about that.
Is there any agencies like or jurisdictions where you look and you say, well, that might be a model of something to emulate, or is there a model that you have in mind?
No, it's really a new frontier with this DNA analysis, and with now there's like a craze of like everyone is quote unquote finding old rape kits that they whatever. And so a lot of them, like, they didn't contemplate like the kind of DNA analysis that we have now. So they may not have stored those samples in a way that we would store samples that we now want to do forensic DNA analysis on. So these are like even sketchier. And so that now they're prosecuting people in all these older cases, and it can be sketchy sometimes.
Well, I think that you really raise a good point, and you know, as you were talking, I was thinking about my own bias, right? Of where if we were probably talking about, because junk science is something that's very, very dear to me. I was an arson investigator. I learned that, you know, there was portions of what we were trained. It was just total bullshit. And, you know, I sleep with every night the idea of like, who did I arrest on this junk science? Junk science is not at all spoken about in the academies. It's wrongful convictions aren't at all. But I caught myself my own bias of going like, I don't. When you said, I wish we could talk about this just like with other crime scenes, because I would be skeptical, and I am very skeptical about processing crime scenes. I know that there's human error that's involved. That isn't nefarious anyway. It's just an error, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, just the idea that, yeah, we're humans. We're going to screw up. There's technological errors. There's things that we believe to be wholeheartedly true today that tomorrow we find out, well, we were wrong about that. You know, much like what in fire science that I learned about. So yeah, I caught myself going, you know, that I don't want to scrutinize rape kits because I'm probably seeing it more as, you know, more as probably, you know, a quick, easy fix to, you know, to this really severely complex issue. So,
well, they can be. It depends on the case.
Sure.
You know? But there's still going to be the variables and the human error at play. But like, if you compare like a stranger rape, like the rape kit would have a different significance whereas like a non-stranger rape, the rape kit may not prove the lack of consent. So it's not like a monolith with rape kits.
Sure. Well, and I think, kind of to Tom's point when we were talking about overall reforms is that from a harm reduction standpoint, yes, there's steps, but this is really such a deep cultural issue too. Funny enough, so I teach at a small college out here, and when we were going over sexual assault investigations, the slide, which was from 2016, said it had something about rape, and then it said, except in instances of so-called marital rape. And like, I had the slide up. I should have reviewed it ahead of time. It about fell over my chair. I couldn't believe that, and it hasn't been that long. I mean, I think it's been less than 10 years for which there wasn't, this marital exception, which is absurd. But I think it speaks to really just kind of this entire reconditioning that we as a culture, and especially, men, that what we have to think about, about rape as a whole, and then hopefully, in cases for which victims do want to report, that there's a better cooperation with the police. There isn't this, weird skepticism of every rape victim is lying. So
should this be so? I don't know the answer to this. I think that there is a function for the state to send out agents who have a monopoly on the use of force to compel people to give, to take people into custody. There are justifiable reasons to use violence to protect people. Is sexual assault, should all sexual assaults be viewed as cases that are handled by the police? Do you think that there could be, do we need a new institution, or do we need reform, or is it a mix of the two? What do you think?
I wouldn't want to create a different institution to handle these things. Like, I have a problem with like the campus sexual assault movement, where they create these like Title IX courts that don't have like due process. I mean, the accusation of a sexual assault is so serious. I don't know. On the other hand, there is the restorative justice type of thing. And I could see that being very beneficial in certain sexual assault cases, like especially where the people know each other. But I have questions about that too, because it's like, if the victim decides to do a restorative justice thing, then the suspect doesn't have to be prosecuted. But it's like, well, like, what if you have a different suspect here and the victim does want it to be prosecuted? Why should that person be in prison, whereas this other person is not, just because the victim didn't want to? Like, I don't know. But I don't really like the idea of creating like new institutions to handle sexual assault. I like my strategy is just to try to be honest about like the shortcomings, and then if someone does want to report their sexual assault to the police, to just try to be as prepared as you can with realistic expectations, and just don't, I don't know. Like, I wish that I had more realistic expectations. If I had just been somewhat prepared for the police to react that way, I may not have internalized it the way that I did.
Right.
But that's a hard question.
No, it's a tough question. So it's mostly about just like being transparent about the shortcomings of the system, both to improve it and also to prepare people that are going to be victimized by it.
Yeah, and I think that also includes like being transparent about all interactions with the police, including interrogations. Like, people should know the possible consequences that come along with agreeing to talk to the police. Whereas whether you're a victim or a suspect.
Yeah, this is another area that is that I talk about a lot with about false confessions, right? Like one of the things I prided myself on as a cop, especially when I made detective, was how well I was about eliciting confessions from individuals. Yeah, some of those were false confessions. Just I know that, right? I mean, I don't know which ones, but I just know by sheer number of just the odds game. I know we're running a little late, and if you need to get run, but there was just one other just quick area that I wanted to hit on, and that was sex registries, especially. After Brock Turner's arrest and the reaction, some took the position that in fact, the judge was recalled because of it, that, the hammer should have dropped down on him, as it would have with someone who was not white and less affluent. Others, on the other hand, talked about the devastating impact that just being on the sexual registry and its effectiveness overall, and how broad we've made it. So, do you have feelings about the registry?
Yeah, definitely. And I have a lot of feelings about the Turner case, and I've actually written about it. But yeah, my position is that we should not have sex offender registries at all, or like civil commitment laws. Just like on a purely personal level, a registry wouldn't have prevented my rape. And I don't think that there's any evidence that registries prevent any victimization. On the other hand, they produce a ton of harm. And I think that it's a clear case of that should not exist. And Turner is on the registry for life, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think that this was something that the idea of it was better than the actual, what it actually turned out to be. When I was living in Indiana, my son came home one day and was telling me about in school, one of these websites about you can look up if there's sexual offenders, and he had told me about it. And for the first time, that was the very first time I'd ever looked at one of these websites, and I saw that one of his friends who just lived about 4 houses down, his mother was on the list. And I was like, oh my God, right? He spent the night over there. Well, she was 20 years old who had sex with a 17-year-old, and that's what landed her on the sexual registry. So one of the really big problems I have is it just lacks any kind of context. You land on it, and you're pretty fucked for life. You're gonna have hard times getting a job. You're never gonna get housing or public housing or assistance. And, that's very different than a 42-year-old man molesting a 6-year-old or someone, who has raped someone. So I feel like it's just overbroad. And again, like to what you said, does it even work? Is there evidence that it works?
Yeah, I don't think there is. And also we have very long prison sentences in this country. So like people who are on the registry, I think it's safe to assume have been to prison and gotten out. So they've served long prison sentences in most cases. So it's like, why are we continuing to subject them to this punishment and shame? They've already served their sentences.
Do you find, or maybe do others, do they point out, kind of the almost contradictory positions of, not contradictory in your beliefs, but what we see very rarely as someone who is a victim of a crime, but then simultaneously that is willing to be speaking out about offenders' rights or about reforming, I think we're one of the only countries left, maybe a couple that, do life sentence without parole.
Yeah, she's fighting. So you're someone who's fighting for the state to do a more thorough job of investigating and enforcing rape laws, while simultaneously displaying a significant amount of empathy for people who are caught up in the criminal justice system as offenders in sex crimes. Is that what you're kind of getting at, Randy?
Yeah, that's where I was going. So is that pointed out as an irony to you, or were you just bringing it up?
my parents probably think that.
Yeah.
It's ironic. But I don't know. Like I want to go into criminal defense eventually, and I don't think it's a contradiction at all. I think that like my experience like could possibly enhance my level of empathy and respect for constitutional rights for all people, including those accused or convicted of crimes. So like I don't see it as a contradiction, but I understand that some people might, because especially with the victim advocacy or like in adjacent type of things, I don't consider PERL a victim advocacy group, but I know that just by virtue of like having experienced some of the things that I have, like it's lumped in there. And then some people may be surprised if like our organization advocates against the sex offender registry. But no, I mean, I don't think it's contradictory at all. I think it makes perfect sense. You can't want rights for yourself if you don't want them for everyone.
Well, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. I mean, I think that, and again, I think this is something that that should be taught in policing. I don't find it contradictory. I find it exactly as you're describing it is that we can't root for one if we're not rooting for the other. If we're talking about reform, we had Professor Jody Armour on recently, who talked a lot about like we've got to be willing to talk about the rights of murderers. Right. We've got
violent criminals.
Someone who has been convicted of pedophilia. Right. And those are uncomfortable conversations to have because it's so ingrained in us that we only speak of the victim being victimized by an individual instead of talking about how there's an additional victimization that's going again to the victim and then also to the offender of our very what's the word, dysfunctional justice system.
Oh yeah.
Well, puritanical. We as a culture, we've always wanted to punish people who step like from the very beginning. I think it's been central to our identity.
Yeah, and I think it's like even ratcheted up even more with sex crimes for some reason.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because I think that sex crimes as a whole, I even think so, probably even more than homicide. I think is viewed as as about the most heinous crime that can be committed. And so, in fact, I saw a TED Talk not too long ago about a woman talking about the psychology behind pedophilia and about how much control not on the actions of pedophiles but the desires of pedophiles. How much control does that individual have? And I'm sure everybody in that auditorium was like, "Oh my God, what?" Right? I mean, because then it feels as if you have someone who's standing up and defending pedophilia, which wasn't the point at all, right? It was just saying that we've got to re-examine the psychology behind pedophilia instead of just throw them under the jail and lose the key kind of thing. So, well, Meaghan, thank you very much for joining us to talk about this really heavy topic. And I know we met a couple of years ago, or talked a couple of years ago, if we'll make sure that your Twitter is here as well to make sure that folks are following you there as well, and access to PERL. Is the article that you wrote about Brock Turner, is that in the Appeal?
Yeah, I actually wrote 2 articles. I can send them to you after
Please.
this.
Yeah, we'll make sure that those are
send them my way, and I'll share them in the podcast so people can check it out.
Awesome. I really enjoyed talking to you guys. Thank you
Oh,
so much for having me on here.
Thank you very much, and be safe from the tornadoes.
I'll be fine. Okay,
Thanks.
thanks.
All right, thanks.
And